Fraud has been changing recently. A lot of organisations focus their attention on front door, but equally, fraud and risk can creep in at the back door as well. Generative AI represents a pretty significant threat from a fraud perspective, both to consumers and individuals from the velocity of threats that they're going to be experiencing, but also to businesses as well. So generative AI essentially is going to allow fraudsters to spin up content, and that content could be images, it could be videos, it could be voice. So any channels where you're authenticating consumers using any of those capabilities are potentially at risk from the threat of generative AI. I think on the flip side to that, generative AI can also be used, which is probably the greatest threat, to create technology and new capabilities. So fraudsters can use it to build scripts, they can use it to build malware, they can use it to increase the velocity and the speed at which they can commit fraud, and they can use AI also to interpret the language that's being used in fraud for targeting victims as well. A money mule traditionally is someone who utilises their current account to process the illicit funds received from a fraudster. Now, a money mule can be a witting money mule, i.e. they can be knowingly moving those accounts on behalf of a fraudster, or they can actually be an unwitting money mule. And we often see that the victims of romance scams can quite often be unwitting money mules, in that fraudsters will befriend them, they'll love bomb them, and then they'll ask them to take funds into their account and transfer them elsewhere. APP fraud, or authorised push payment fraud, is essentially any fraud where an individual is conned, essentially, by a criminal to transfer money. They're typically doing that wittingly, so they haven't had their account taken over, they're actually part of that process, they're authorising the funds to be transferred. So a great example would be buying a car on an online marketplace. You may be approached by someone with a car that's priced too good to be true. That individual will typically ask you to transfer a deposit, and when you transfer that deposit, there is no car, and that individual has no intention whatsoever of providing you with any goods. So you've wittingly transferred money to someone, and it becomes very difficult to get those funds back once they enter the system. Scammification will essentially be where there are groups of individuals, potentially criminals, that are colluding together to continue to process authorised push payments. So scammification essentially could be a number of different things. So at the top end of the scale, you could have organised criminal networks that are colluding, processing payments with each other and effectively getting reimbursed. That could be using stolen credentials or other information. It could even be used to facilitate money laundering. At the bottom end, you could have enthusiastic amateurs or groups of friends potentially that are processing payments to each other and claiming that those are scams and therefore receiving the funds back. Fraud has been changing, and I think part of that has been due to the cost of living crisis. And what we're increasingly seeing is what I call fraud of need rather than fraud of greed. And fraud of need is typically where individuals are committing first-party fraud. So that is genuine consumers using their information, maybe manipulating details such as their income, such as their employment, in order to gain access to credit and funds. Equally, we see what I would call second-party fraud, which is assisted first-party fraud, increasing. So when consumers are stretched financially, they're looking for solutions to help them with that financial position. So that's why we're seeing the massive increase in the amount of romance scams, as an example, crypto investment scams as well, where individuals are being convinced that they can make vast sums of money that potentially help them to pay off their bills by being involved in these high-risk investments. The critical thing for organisations is that layered strategy, which gets away from that wish that there's a silver bullet, but allows them to fully assess fraud risk throughout the customer journey.